Hello everyone, Max here with Fiction Rant to bring you part 6 of my Imperium vs. Terrans matchup. That's the Imperium of Man from Warhammer 40k against the Terrans from Starcraft. This section will be going over the unique advantages that each side has. Also, if you want to support the channel, there's a Ko-fi link in the description. Like with my last section, I'll first be covering a couple things that I missed in the previous section. Mainly, I got called out by a couple of you this week on this, so thanks for that. I said in the numbers section that Titans are rarely deployed, and when they are, they're certainly deployed solo. I had this mostly backward. True, they are rarely deployed, typically to counter other Titan-class threats, but where I got it backward is that they are pretty much never deployed alone. They're simply too valuable to risk on solo missions. Instead, groups will be deployed, and they'll even link their void shields together to spread incoming damage around for protection. The size of a given Titan battle group will vary, but in any case, generally speaking, you're talking under 10 in any given battle, so call it a handful. I should clarify also the way that void shields actually work. They don't block damage. They redirect it into the warp. This means that if you were to do something like launch a nuke at a void shielded target and the shields were able to stop it and all that, the shields would just teleport the entire nuke into the warp and let it blow up there. And the void shield would take next to no damage from this. It would just take a bit of energy to do so. Finally, I mentioned that Titans are irreplaceable if lost. This is sort of true. The Imperium does build new Titans, but they have to be built in very special factories, generally on Forge Worlds, which utilize mysterious methods to produce most of the Titan components. These facilities are totally irreplaceable, and the Titans they produce are still incredibly resource-intensive to make and are thus deployed very sparingly. Alright, on to the uniques. First of all, I'd like to talk about the psychics on each side. For the Terrans, they're called psionics, and they're a relatively new thing which the Terrans are attempting to develop. They test their children for psionic potential, and any that are sufficiently naturally talented tend to be recruited to either be a ghost or some other kind of operative. Depending on the power level of the individual, the powers can consist of just being able to sense other psionics, telepathy, or even a degree of telekinesis, though this is limited to things like jamming firearms, moving small objects around, or even levitating, and sometimes even frying people's brains. In the Imperium, you have psychers. As with the Terrans, psychers are extremely rare, but, as I mentioned in the last section, the population of the Imperium is absolutely gigantic, so there's still a lot of psychers running around. Psychers channel the warp, which is essentially hell, in order to perform supernatural feats. This has the downside of potential chaos corruption for the psycher that can just be going crazy or becoming demonically possessed. In exchange for the danger, though, psychers can command a variety of powers depending on the particular discipline, from telepathy and telekinesis to turning themselves invisible, seeing the future, conjuring lightning or flames, teleportation, conjuring shields of various kind, etc., etc., etc. There's a whole list of powers on the fandom wiki, and I'm sure that the list is still incomplete when you factor in the more powerful named characters and what they can do, plus whatever might come out in future, or just the wiki people missed. There's a lot of powers on there. Psychers come in a ton of shapes and sizes, and there's even Space Marines, notably the Grey Knights, who have all the benefits of being Space Marines and having the gene seed, combined with Psycher powers. And they're totally incorruptible by the warp, so they're kind of the anti-warp corruption hit squad. On both the Terran and Imperium sides, psionics and psychers are often enhanced using technology, and also on both sides there are technologies developed to interfere with the psychic abilities of others, so the powers can be countered not only by other psychics, but also by appropriate technology. I'll move on from psychics, since going over everything would just be a video series of its own. There's plenty there, but I'm not going to get into it all. Something else that the Imperium has which kind of works in its favor, but in a super brutal way, because of course it is their mentality of the ends justifying the means, but taken to a crazy extreme. Basically, lives are considered in a highly transactional manner. They aren't to be wasted by any means, but if winning a battle or traveling through the warp requires some lost lives, they're perfectly acceptable in the Imperium. I'll mention 3 examples of what I'm talking about. For one, the Emperor of Man is this shell of his former self following the Horus Heresy where he was nearly killed, and is on some pretty extreme life support, which includes having to sacrifice some 1,000 psychers per day just to keep him alive. It's a testament to the size of the Imperium that despite how rare they are, they can still do that and not deplete their numbers appreciably. The second example is regarding the engines of the Imperium ships, which require radioactive fuel to be carried in and placed in the ship's reactors by hand, as the person delivering the fuel is literally just melting into goo due to the intense radiation. This is basically just considered a cost of doing business and running a ship. Finally, exterminatus, the purging of all life off a planet. This is done very rarely and only as a last resort, but is absolutely an option that sometimes gets used on a Imperium world, but only if the threat is dire enough. So let's say that a Tyranid hive fleet shows up to even something like a hive world with its hundreds of billions of citizens. The Imperium will do everything that it can to try to save that world. But if the fight is lost, and it's still an option, if you have a high enough ranking Imperium officer around, they can order exterminatus to wipe out the invaders and all their own people to try to just deplete the enemy's resources. Tyranids in particular, they put in a lot of biomass into their attacks, so if exterminatus happens, you're basically just starving them out. It's an effective tactic, but very brutal. The last thing that I want to talk about in this section is the different mentalities on innovation between the Imperium and Terrans. Terrans are highly interested in everything that can give them an edge and spend a lot of time and effort to try to develop new technologies or improve on existing ones, for better or for worse. Multiple missions in the game surround new prototypes that will hopefully make a big difference in the fight against particularly the Zerg. Be that mechs like the Odin prototype, which was a precursor to the Thor, or the Psi Disruptor, which interferes with the Zerg psionic link and makes them less coordinated. Terrans are also big fans of artificial intelligence, and utilize it for everything from navigation and research to entertainment. Terran AIs aren't sentient, but they're just really highly sophisticated computers that heavily augment the functionality of all aspects of the Terran military. For contrast, the Imperium has a pretty bad relationship with technology, though they have one heck of a head start. Basically, back during the Dark Age of Technology, which took place between the 15th and 25th millennium, remember when the 40th millennium, where all these events are taking place, humanity had developed incredible technology, which had the unfortunate downside of causing widespread and massive destruction, and led to technology and science being viewed as abhorrent and dangerous to much of humanity in the first millennium. Most of the amazing things that the Imperium still uses are left over from the Dark Age of Technology, including the means to produce Titans, the gene seed of the Space Marines, and many of the weapons they use. That said, there's a lot of tech that is full-on taboo to use, though it's often used anyway and just relabeled. For example, AI is seen as a total abomination, though certain pieces of antiquated technology have robust, quote-unquote, machine spirits, which help them operate more effectively. The fears regarding AI aren't unfounded, as there's been multiple instances of AI endangering humanity, in particular through AI humanoid constructs called the Men of Iron, who waged war upon humanity in the 23rd millennium. It's a complicated relationship for the Imperium, since, obviously, better technology provides a ton of advantages. But at the same time, certain technologies have almost spelled doom for the whole species, and much has been lost. Sometimes, though, this technology gets rediscovered, in particular when an STC, or Standard Template Construct, is discovered, which is a colonization tool. Basically, it's a database that contains all human knowledge from the Dark Age of Technology. They're basically never discovered fully intact, but even a tiny portion of the information contained within can be enough to revolutionize the technology of whoever happens to gain control of it, so whole battles will be fought to capture an STC. For the most part, the Adeptus Mechanicus are the only people really allowed to dive into technology and innovation, largely because they just kind of don't care about the rules set by most of the Imperium. They get to break a lot of those rules, but they're also the source of most of the war material and maintenance of the Imperium, so they're allowed to get away with it. Basically, if there's any innovation to be had in the Imperium, it's via the Mechanicus. Unfettered, they'd probably be capable of producing technology at a rate comparable to the Tau, though that's just my own thought, just because they have so much resources to chuck at research and development, but fear keeps them relatively restrained, so big developments are pretty few and far between overall. But yeah, that's all I'm going to go into for this section. There's a ton which makes each side unique, certainly more on the Imperium side since there's just a lot more information to be had in the 40k universe than in the Starcraft universe, but those elements are those which I think are probably the most important on each side. Let me know in the comments if there's anything significant I didn't mention. Again, my knowledge on each side isn't even close to encyclopedic, so for any of you out there who know more, feel free to chip in. If there's something that I think is significant enough to bring up, I will absolutely bring it up in the next section. Again, I have a Ko-fi link in the description, so if you want to support the channel, that's great. And until next time, live long and prosper, and may the Force be with you.